To say that Star Wars is popular would be a massive understatement. When the first movie came out in theaters back in 1977, my dad, who never sees a movie more than once, saw it twice in the first 24 hours that it was out. The original trilogy went on to become tremendously popular. It was great. It had cool space battles, lightsaber fights, and themes that everybody could relate to, like family, the triumph of good over evil, as well as elements of pop psychology and Jungian archetypes that made it even more relatable to the average person. It remains to this day the preeminent example of the hero's journey in film. By the time the prequels were announced, Star Wars had become a cultural juggernaut. The merchandise, the advertising, and even the special edition re-releases solidified the place of Star Wars as a permanent fixture of our culture. Most people, even if they don't care about sci-fi movies, adventure movies, or movies in general, still know who Darth Vader is. And the people who do care are obsessed. The toys, the fan films, the conventions, the books, the comics, the games, the clothing, the fact that parents pass on Star Wars to their kids like one of their family traditions, distinguish this franchise from other pop cultural artifacts. There's an entire genre of YouTube channels that subsists entirely on making Star Wars related content. I was going to make the observation that Star Wars is like a religion, but there actually is a real-life Jedi religion with more than 20,000 practitioners. It's a real thing. And if Star Wars is a religion, then the new trilogy is the Protestant Reformation. Of course, the divergent opinions about the new sequel trilogy haven't caused a repeat of the 100 Years' War, but Star Wars doesn't represent a pre-Enlightenment belief system. As a culturally ubiquitous myth in our society, Star Wars was designed with a specific intention to impart our overarching values to future generations. Ideas like the struggle between good and evil, heroic individualism, resistance to authoritarianism and militarism, and above all, the preservation of tradition. Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard is widely regarded as the most influential work of postmodern philosophy in recent years. The book begins with the old analogy of the empire and the map. I'll present a more simplified description of it here. Suppose a cartographer decides to map out a great empire at the height of its power. He covers the entire landscape on this map, every detail, every contour of the land, and every facet of every structure. The map is essentially a perfect copy of all the land under the empire's control. Baudrillard calls this map a simulation of the empire. Over time, the empire collapses, the land is divided by its conquerors, new borders are drawn, the geography of the land is changed, but the map remains. Because the map, which is to say the copy, still exists, but the original does not, Baudrillard calls the map a simulacrum rather than a simulation. So what does this have to do with Star Wars? Well, people tend to prefer simulacra to their real lives, and the Star Wars franchise is just one example of a simulacrum that people in the Western world almost unanimously appreciate. Star Wars is a universe that a lot of people prefer to live in over our own actual universe. People spend hours researching lore and obscure characters, objects, and locations that don't even exist. It's a lot like a religion, really, in that it has some metaphysical components that have no bearing on our material reality, but are nonetheless studied relentlessly by its devotees, some of whom achieve a level of encyclopedic knowledge about Star Wars that rivals that of many actual theologians. People are invested in Star Wars, so when there's widespread disagreement among the fans, like we've seen in the wake of The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens, and to a lesser degree, Rogue One, this leads inevitably to episodes of extreme animosity online. People have been downright nasty to each other when discussing the latest Star Wars movies. Consider all the angry tweets and threats Rian Johnson received after the release of The Last Jedi. People are passionate about their hatred or love for the newest installment in the franchise, and this is becoming more consistent and more fervent with each new film. But as long as this kind of behavior is confined to our online interactions, it won't become as serious of a problem, especially considering that online Star Wars fans can be ignored, blocked, or muted. Terms like nerd or geek used to refer only to a group of socially inept people who retreated into their private simulacra of comic books, sci-fi novels, and pen and paper role-playing games as an alternative to floundering in social settings. But in the last decade, these terms have come to refer to a much wider range of young people and adults who are heavily invested in one or more fandoms. The nerds of the 20th century decided to flee their social ineptitude by investing their time heavily into solitarily experienced fictional pastimes, which ironically created a feedback loop that slowed their already stunted social development even further. The same problem has arisen within contemporary nerd culture. Normal people becoming nerds doesn't make nerds socially adept, it makes normal people into socially inept nerds. Obviously, it may not always function to the same degree given people's differences and base level social aptitude, but the effects are nonetheless manifestly obvious. Social conventions are currently all that stands between you and having to put up with angry Star Wars fans in real life, and those conventions are slowly being dissolved. One counterargument might be that Star Wars, even if it does reach this point, will just become a topic of conversation like politics or religion. One that you can't discuss in public or with people with whom you're not very close. However, it seems evident that people who don't like The Last Jedi are often more zealous about this conviction than people who are practitioners of actual religion or people who are actually political activists.
And it's like an auditorium of like 50,000 people, and they're all like cheering, and you know, they have people up there, and it's like a political rally, and you know, Kathleen Kennedy's like pounding her fists on a podium, and you know, everyone's like, you know, holding up signs. So you have this weird flock mentality, sheep mentality of people that are just like blind fans to this. It's almost like a cult now.
That being said, I'm not sure whether anything like this scenario will actually happen on a large scale. I do, however, think it's a problem that people's behavior online has prompted me to arrive at the conclusion that this is even a remote possibility. The problem with Star Wars, even if it remains purely an online problem, is still a tremendous issue. And to a degree, it's obviously part of a few bigger problems faced by our society. We live in extremely divisive times from a political standpoint, and that's begun to seep into our entertainment. We have to deal with problems that come with widespread use of the internet, both problems we're already aware of and problems we've yet to even realize, not to mention the problem of the social instability caused by the dissolution of metaphysical institutions. In many respects, these problems are all connected, and now, for better or worse, Star Wars has become just one more piece of the equation. So as fans, let's sort this out before we start seeing fistfights at Taco Bell over whether Snoke was actually Jar Jar.